Another very lovely evening to all of you, my dear friends. I'm ever so thankful once again that you all could join me. We left off in our part 16 of the Life of Christ studies with the death of John the Baptist, and that's where we pick up now. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart, and when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. Jesus may have withdrawn, Charles Ellicott noted, to avoid being the center of the popular excitement which the death of John was likely to cause. Also, the 12 disciples had just returned from their missionary circuit, and it was indeed partly to give them too an interval of repose, give them a break. And the Passover was coming on, and all the roads of Galilee were thronged with companies of pilgrims hastening to keep the feast at Jerusalem. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals, food. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company coming to him, he saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread, that these may eat? And this he said to prove Philip, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him. Now let's not pass this up, how Jesus is testing his disciples at this time, specifically Philip, for whatever reason. We do know that Philip was probably with Christ in Cana, and he's seen the water into wine, and it had been about almost 2 years since then. So Jesus may be just trying to establish whether their faith has grown. But Simon Peter's brother Andrew says, There is a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves, and 2 small loaves, but what are they among so many? Ellicott noted, Again, the account of the eyewitness is the more full and lifelike. John knows that they are barley loaves, the ordinary black bread of the Galilean peasant, and that the loaves and fishes are not the property of the disciples, but of a lad or servant, who has followed the crowd in the hope, it may be, of finding a purchaser for them. Or it may have been as the popular narrative of the child coming up with the food and saying, I know that people are hungry, if you wish, here you can have this. Very generous to think that sounds probable as well. For they were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, Jesus says to us, Make them sit down by 50s in a company. Cambridge commented, There were also women and children there, but there wasn't as many of the women and children as one would believe. Most of them would have been at home. These would probably not be numerous, and would not, in accordance with Eastern usage, sit down with the men, but would stand apart. Now here's the only verse that we really have for the insight on how this miracle occurred. Then Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them, and brake, and gave to the disciples to set before the multitude. Once again, Cambridge noted, Although it is a useless presumption to inquire into the mode of this most remarkable miracle, these 2 words give us this detail only, that it took place between the act of breaking and the continuous distribution. This is very bizarre. And Mark and Luke, Pulpit commented, the tense of the verb rendered gave in the original Greek is an imperfect and signifies he gave and kept on giving. This supplies a hint as to the way of working the miracle. Each disciple kept coming to him for a fresh supply of bread. Of course, the creator of all things, he's going to be the source of this spontaneous creation. The evangelists make no attempt to explain it. They evidently did not care to ask. They beheld it and related it to us just as they saw it in its simple grandeur. Neither disciples nor crowds seem at first to have grasped the stupendous nature of the act. John tells us of its effect on the crowds, who, when they came to see, now pay close attention, who, when the crowd came to see what had been done, wished to take him by force and make him king. For a brief space they were convinced that in the poor Galilee rabbi they had found King Messiah. But we see right here how a whole multitude believe he's the Messiah. None but he could have done this great thing. They were right. Also take note that this miracle is one of the most important that Jesus ever performed that we know about. It is the only miracle recorded by all the four evangelists. So out of the water into wine and healing the lepers and all of these, this is the only miracle mentioned in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It was also the fullest manifestation of the sovereignty of the Son of Man over the world of nature. The act was distinctly one of creative power and does not admit, as some of the works of healing might seem to do, of being explained away as the result of strong faith or excited imagination on the part of those who were its objects. You see, if Jesus heals a leper, then the skeptics can look at that and say, well, he may have just healed up on his own. It may just sheer coincidence is the way that most skeptics look at it most of the time. But with this is literally just coming out of nowhere. It's very possible that what Christ is doing is he's breaking the bread and then handing what is broken to the disciple, and then he breaks another, and then breaks another, and then breaks another, and then just kept doing it like that, instead of completely blowing their minds with something appearing out of nothing, which would have probably terrified most of them. It would shock me quite a bit if I seen that. But there's some way in which he did this, and they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. John Gill wrote that nothing is lost. Christ tells them, don't waste food. This, he said, partly that the truth, reality, and greatness of the miracle might be clearly discerned, and partly to teach frugality, that in the midst of abundance, care be taken that nothing be lost of the good things which God gives, and which may be useful to other persons, or at another time. But this 12 baskets, this would have been one for each disciple, and I believe that this may have been to strengthen their faith. They were very much aware that no one had food in the midst of all the thousands. And what Jesus did completely, they have it in their hands while they're walking. They can see the miracle for their own eyes. It's literally right in front of their faces. This may have been to strengthen their faith. Then those men, the thousands that were there, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world that Moses prophesied. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. So Jesus, he departs into the mountain first to get away from this rambunctious crowd and lets everything settle down, and then it's assumed that he comes back, and straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida, while he sent away the people, probably the remaining people. And when he had sent them away, he departed again into the mountain to pray. Now I'm adding again in there, as it seems like this happened twice. But before we go any further, just notice how Jesus says to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida. In the Gospel of John, it makes mention of Capernaum. There's no contradiction here. John Gill explained it, or rather to go to the other side over against Bethsaida, for they were now in a desert belonging to Bethsaida. Wherefore they were ordered to go, and did go to the other side of the sea of Tiberias, or Galilee, even to Capernaum, as appears from John 6. And they entered into a ship and went over the sea toward Capernaum, and it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind. They had been rowing all night. And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. Adam Clarke noted how the fourth watch began at 3 a.m. and continued till 6. It was therefore between the hours of 3 and 6 in the morning that Jesus made his appearance to his disciples. They would have been very tired, very beyond exhausted probably at this point, because you have to remember this is a huge storm coming up. They're probably rowing. They're probably talking about the miracle. They're mentally, physically, emotionally, all these things just shot, exhausted. And then Jesus starts walking on the sea towards them. Thus, suspending the laws of gravitation was a proper manifestation of unlimited power. In this one miracle, we may discover three things. Though at a distance from his disciples, he knew their distress. He found them out on the lake and probably in the midst of darkness, and he walked upon the water. Okay, that's an obvious one. But you also have to realize how they have been rowing now for hours and probably taking their time about it, waiting for Christ. And Jesus finds them. This would have been very difficult because the Sea of Galilee is not small. This would have been difficult. It's a little fishing boat in the midst of a sea, and it's at night with the waves roaring, and Christ walks out to them. This would have been very frightening, as a matter of fact. So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, they see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh to the ship, and they were afraid. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit," and they cried out for fear. It takes an awful lot for a full-grown man to yell out in fear. I've seen it done. I've done it myself. You're just scared by something and you cry out, because men we try to stay reserved and strong and composed, and we don't want to look, we want to look tough. So this would have been very breathtaking. And you also have to keep in mind how they just witnessed an incredible miracle of feeding these thousands and thousands of people. They just witnessed this, not just a few hours before, and now they're seeing this. It's just an overload of wonder and marvel coming from one person. Oh man, I bet heaven is just incredible, y'all. I'm being honest. Benson noted, "It is well known that it is never entirely dark on the water, that the moon might perhaps now be in the last quarter, as it must have been if this was about 3 weeks before the Passover, by that little light." Okay, so they could see him. The moon would have been shining upon him enough. "By that little light, therefore, which they had, the disciples seeing him, but not perfectly discerning who he was, were much terrified, for they justly supposed that no human body could be supported by the water. And they cried out for fear," Gill says, "as persons in the midst of the utmost consternation, in the greatest danger, and in want of help. The fear of the disciples might be increased through a vulgar notion among seafaring men that such sights are ominous evil, and portend evil to sailors, and they might the more easily be induced to give credit to this, and fear, since they were already in such imminent danger by the storm." They probably thought that it was the devil coming to kill them or something, and yet what a relief on who it was, the greatest relief. "But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." The sweetest words you could ever hear. We can scarcely doubt, Ellicott wrote, that in after years that moment came back to their recollection, Jesus appearing in the midst of the sea, invested for them, as it has been since for the church at large, with something of a symbolic character. I'm sure that you all have heard preacher after preacher say, if God can calm this storm, if he can show up in the midst of your storm like he did them, surely he will, a symbolic character. "Often the sky became dark, and the waves of the troublesome world were rough, and the blast of persecution beat on them, and the ark of Christ's church was tossed on the waters, and they were wearied and spent with rowing. They thought themselves abandoned, and then, in the dim twilight, they would see or feel once again the tokens of his presence. He was coming to them through the storm. Be of good cheer became the watchword of their lives. Alexander McLaren makes a pretty good observation how the disciples, even seeing all of these wonderful miracles, the disciples were as yet little lifted above their fellows. They had no expectation of his coming and thought just what any rude minds would have thought, that this mysterious thing stalking towards them across the waters came from the unseen world, and probably that it was the herald of their drowning. Terror froze their blood and brought out a shriek which was heard above the dash of waves and the raving wind. They had gallantly fought the tempest, but this unmanned them. Yeah, and that's another thing, how this storm was no doubt very, very frightening. But this gave them the greatest pause, seeing this man walking on water coming out to them. How blessed must have been the moment when that astounding certitude thrilled through their souls. That low voice is audible through all the tumult. Now, all of the ruckus in life, all the horrid things that could happen to a person. And then there's this one voice. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. So if it's really you, they're still perplexed. This would have been such a gnarly sight to behold. Johann Bengel noted, a remarkable exercise of faith. Simon Peter, from desire for Jesus, leaves the vessel. Whether he has to walk on the sea or to swim through it, it doesn't matter. He just wants to come to Jesus. And that's the reason why everyone loves King David and Simon Peter, because they just have such a fervor for Christ. And Jesus said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. I like how Jesus, he didn't tell him to pray. He didn't say, well, wait a few minutes, let me pray for you. Or he didn't say no. He just says, come. As it always strikes me. But when Peter saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Yeah, the Sea of Galilee is not a shallow place. The expositors noted, it is one thing to see a storm from the deck of a stout ship, another to see it in midst of the waves. It's easy to criticize Simon Peter for this, but just picture yourself walking on water. It's a completely new experience. And by the way, it is a terrible storm all around you. And God in the flesh right before you, walking on water with you, bidding you. I can't really explain it. Albert Barnes noted, Peter was rash, headlong, incautious, really attached to Jesus, but still easily daunted and prone to fall, as are we all. He was afraid, therefore, when in danger and sinking, cried again for help. Thus he was suffered to learn his own character and his dependence on Jesus, a lesson which all Christians are permitted sooner or later to learn by dear bought experience. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him. I like how it says that he caught him. It's not like Simon Peter reached up when his hand was drawn. No, Jesus actually reached down and grabbed him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And Jesus went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. Okay, so the storm ceases upon Jesus entering into the ship. This goes to tell all of us how this was truly a test for them. All of this is a test. But also notice the expression made right here of the disciples' reaction. And they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure and wondered. Cambridge once again. Observe the strong expressions here employed. Not only were they sore amazed, but beyond measure. Never had the disciples been so impressed by the majesty of Christ as they were now in consequence of this miracle, walking on water. They avowed for the first time collectively what one of them had long since separately declared him to be, the Son of God. There was no denying at this point, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of Jesus, they sent out into all that country round about and brought unto him all that were diseased. So the miracle of the feeding of the thousands probably happened right along in here, probably near Bethsaida, not far from it. But probably happened right along in here. They come to Capernaum, get out, then walk to Gennesaret. And they besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched were made perfectly whole. You hear an awful lot about the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years touching the hem of his garment, but right here we're told how many did this and were made whole. But that is it, my friends, for today's study. What a man, what a man this truly is. What a great God, no one can know him as being so powerful, and we often overlook these things told to us about this one man whom has changed everything, even our date and our times. And I've went over this numerous times, but even it's 2021 right now because they tried to line up the time of the world with Christ's birth. He has literally changed every single thing and walks on. But I'm very thankful for Jesus. I am, as he makes life worth living. And I mean that in the most literal sense. Without this man, Jesus, without him, there is no hope beyond this life. It's all about Jesus. It's the entire Bible, all this life, all this reality. It's all about Jesus. You'll figure that out before too long, atheist or Christian. But that is it for today's study, my dear friends. I thank you all for joining me here, Lord willing. In the next few days, we'll be picking up in part 18. God of peace, love, and mercy be with you. Amen.